Podcast with Suibhne, episode number 7, if that is to be believed. A show that is both hard to spell, but also does have the feature that it has a live chat, so you can tell me I'm wrong in real time. Who else offers you that? Last week we talked a little bit about actually for the past 2 weeks, because streaming is hard. For the past 2 weeks we talked a little bit about the practice of village burning. And why it's this like strangely unique thing that seems to happen. I mean, it's not unique, but it's one of those things that is just characteristic of wartime in the Balkans. And this week we're going to talk a little bit about the Serbian Revolution with some maps that actually might have some labels this time, but no guarantees. We shall see. It is also customary on this show that we wait about 30 seconds before anything happens, just to make sure that our audio is coming through. So far, so bad. Just going to have a quick peek over here. Nothing is coming through. If there's anybody in the chat, could you just let me know if you can hear anything? That seems to be working all right. Okay. Sorry about that delay. So after that customary 30 seconds, we have finally figured out that the audio is working. It's one of those things where like you don't get updates quick enough that you're actually live. Like when you're logging in on that side of YouTube, just the public facing side of YouTube, it doesn't actually like show up with the little live logo as soon as you go live. It still takes that little delay. But anyway, now that time has passed, I can tell you to please like and share this episode. If you'd like your questions answered, you can become a Patreon supporter or a member on the main channel. But for you, this audience is still small, so you might get lucky in the live chat if you just want to do it that way. I might just have a little peek in the live chat every now and then, and maybe we'll have some questions answered. What do we reckon? All those links are down below. So today's main topic is going to be the Serbian Revolution. Let's dive a little bit deeper into an actual real intense period of fighting for the rebirth of the Serbian nation. We talked a bit about how the Ottomans sort of came as this like infidelic horde and swept over the Balkans and conquered all of its territory. And one of the sort of ancient or late antiquity, early Middle Ages kingdoms or empires that fell to the Ottomans were, of course, the Serbs. You know them, you love them. I've been talking about them for weeks now. This is all going to be very supplementary to the main video. We've been really delving into the topic about like the practices of war, the origin of the militarism. We've been talking about the rebellions. We've been talking about this like political structure that the Serbs in diaspora started attaining for themselves. There's this whole thing of them trying to like fight for their rights, like in a diplomatic way within the Austrian Empire, the realms of the Habsburgs, the House of Habsburg that sort of grew and found itself facing deep within the Balkans and capitalizing on this vast amount of territory south. As the empire started to fall back, it started inheriting a lot of that area, and one of the motivations certainly would have been for the Habsburgs, at least. One of the motivations would be to sort of put as much distance between themselves and the opposite, the Turkish forces. These were like hardcore enemies, and they really wanted to put that distance there because it's harder to move armies through hostile territory. It's you want them to, if you want them to stay at bay, you want to make them march through hostile territory. You want to be controlling that territory if it's yours on your side of the border. That's just kind of like a very militaristic way of looking at it. But taking over these lands and pushing south into the Balkans, there's also economic reasons why you would want to do that. You can exploit the various riches. You can increase manpower. in a very feudalistic society, manpower is like the key form of like all of the economy. It's just one of those things where there's a lot of economic benefits. Oh, and like metals, there's a lot of like precious metals and that sort of thing in the Balkans, in those mountains that you can control. And if you have enough capital, like a big empire controls enough resources and capital to be able to invest in mining towns and granting charters and privileges and rights to these towns to make them more economically profitable. Because if the Turks are controlling that area, the Turks have this very like insular economic policy. They don't like trading with the Christian powers of Europe, especially. Their major western-facing flank, as well as the whole of the Mediterranean, is dominated by these Christian kingdoms. And they don't want to the economic theory that prevailed in the late Middle Ages into the early modern period. The economic theory was well trade is like bad. Like if you're trading, you're sending resources across the border, cross-border trade, that's bad. We're just going to try and keep everything in-house. We're going to have a self-contained economy, a la the Soviet Union. So something similar like that. Obviously, I'm not an economist. Please don't quote me. I know my voice is soothing, but I'm actually unqualified. So let's talk a little bit about how we got from last week's episode. We were talking about how in last week's episode and the week before, about how the Habsburgs helped liberate what was the core of the Serbian kingdom. This area called Smederevo, this like Danube-facing southern Sanjak of the Ottoman Empire. It was the core part of the reinforced part of the Ottoman Empire that the Austrians had reinforced their half of the border with the military frontier. The Ottomans did a lot of the same thing, and they moved populations around and granted them certain privileges. A lot of the similar things were happening, and they were like fortifying towns, that sort of thing. And one of the big strongholds was still for a very long time was Belgrade. Belgrade was the de facto capital of the Sanjak of Smederevo. For a long time, it was like Smederevo was like this big fortress on the Danube that was one of the last sort of strongholds used by the independent Serbian monarchy, and then that essentially became the symbol of power, even though but Belgrade was by far the more formidable fortress. So I think informally, people just called this area Belgrade and the southern area of Belgrade, but they the formal name was still Smederevo. To give you a quick look at what the areas that we're talking about. So what we have on screen here is a reproduction of a painting of the death of a Hajduk. So Hajduks, we talked a bit about them. These like bandit warriors turn rebel leaders. They become these like another word for them is like chetniks, or we've talked a bit about the different words that are used to describe them. So this is a Hajduk Veliko, I believe it is, and this is a depiction of his death defending a fortress while fighting the Turks. So we'll get to him later. This is something that happens as the Serbian Revolution breaks up. The Serbian Revolution happens a lot later than the restoration of the Kingdom of Serbia by the Habsburgs. So this is the rough time period we're working with here on the map. This is 1718, and this is essentially the extent of Habsburg Serbia, where the emperor, I think it was either Joseph or Leopold or whomever, I can't actually remember. It was pre-Joseph, whoever it was, and he decided that he was going to adopt the title King of Serbia. So he's King of Bosnia, King of Serbia, King of Croatia, King of Hungary, Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. He's got all these titles. In essence, staking a claim, and this is a very unsuccessful state. It lasts a couple of decades, but it's essentially sort of just left and treated as this like extreme frontier. So all these like Serbs are like, yay, we're liberated, and very quickly they're like, oh no, we're liberated. They're not keen on the Habsburgs. They're not keen on these like German troops that get stationed along the area. This is where the Habsburgs, the Austrians, they send all their riffraff. They send all their like troublemaking, the people that they'd rather have as far away from the court in Vienna. They send down to Serbia, and they're just like taking advantage of all the Serbian population. It's not great, and eventually they go to war with the Ottomans again, and they lose the territory. So around, I think it's like it lasts maybe 20 years, and it's 1728. Maybe 1738 that they lose the territory, and then by 1740 it's sort of looking like this. Old status quo antebellum is the Latin phrase, which means we'll go back to how things were before we had a war. Antebellum means like pre-war. So Belgrade is just that little section in black there. That is the bit that was liberated, and then they realized, oh no, we can't hold this anymore, and they retreated. And in the ensuing peace treaty between the two powers, status quo antebellum, everything goes back to where it were. So it's like, what do we even fight for, you know? And then a second major migration happens across the Danube. It's a whole thing. So today we're going to talk about what happened between this time and the Serbian Revolution. Serbian Revolution is kind of a misnomer. It is not one revolution. It is several big stages of things that happen over time. So it's like, first you have the major military conflicts that happened during the Serbian Revolution, and there's basically 4 of those. So there's 2 big ones and 4 in total if you include the little ones. And all of the social and economic and political changes sort of happen in between. The really important stuff happens in the in-between of these conflicts. Conflicts, they get a lot of, press. They get an unfair treatment in the recounting of history. Military history is like incredibly boring if you're somebody like me, but I really like the sort of like economic and political changes that happen in the meantime. And that's the kind of thing that all of this bunched up together is what is called the Serbian Revolution. So what happened? How did Serbia go from being retreated from the Ottomans, from the who are they called again? The Habsburgs. How did we go from retreating Habsburgs to Serbian Revolution? All right. There'd been a lot of changes into the structure of the Ottoman Empire when the Turkish rule was restored. So they thought, okay, well, we need to clearly, this stuff isn't working. We need to figure out how to keep Belgrade. We need to keep this like monumental citadel. We need to try and make the Serbs happy. But of course, there's internal problems that happen that come along with that, because the Ottoman state is kind of a shadow of its former glory at this point anyway. Obviously, it still has a lot of military strength, but that military strength is a little bit more spread out. It's no longer sort of a centralized state in the same way that it used to be. A lot of its military strength has been devolved into the power of the Janissaries and the pashas. So pashas are sort of a governor, and a section of, I think it's like a sanjak, and then a pashalik is below that or above that. I can't exactly remember what they are. So they decide to bring back their sanjaks and their nihayas, and these are all just basically administrative divisions that they bring back, and they want to basically regain control over Serbia. And then they install their military governor, and they set up his capital back in Belgrade, and they try and rebuild Belgrade. They try and pour a lot of money into the fortresses and garrisons and put those troops. They put in Janissaries. The Janissaries as a social class, it's like a hereditary thing by this point, and you get paid for it. So you're no longer just the Sultan's guard, which is how these people are originated as like kidnapped. It was like a child tax in essence. They would tax the Christian communities. In addition to money, they would tax them in children. So you would give up a child. And if either willingly or unwillingly, they would take them away. They would steal them away and raise them in Islam and force them to be Janissaries. And these Janissaries were no longer living in the capital. They were being moved into different towns and starting to invest their money into things. They're reinvigorating trade and different kinds of artisans. They become artisans and they control a lot of wealth. And they become hereditary, which means that their position can be passed down to their kids. And they were also extremely well paid. They part of the Ottoman state and the deal that they'd negotiated with the imperial power was that they were incredibly well paid. And that means that they have a lot of money to spend and a lot of power to have. Eventually, if you got these really well paid, hereditary, militarily organized people, you start to get concentration of power and wealth. This is exactly the same thing that happened in feudalism. You got these hereditary noble families that essentially originated, it's complicated, but they originated as hereditary fiefdoms who were given out to military leaders. And then that sort of, all the privileges that are associated with that mean that you start to hoard wealth. And if you hoard enough wealth and power, you start to rival the king or emperor or whomever gave you that power and wealth. And what else are they going to do with their money? They're going to invest it into enterprises and that kind of thing. When you in Islam, you can't make money just based on interest. So like lending money is very difficult to do with a clean Muslim conscience. So another way that they would try to make money is like investing into crafts and trade and that kind of thing, and try to make their money grow in that way. This is an incredible amount of power. The shifting balance of power is changing in the Balkans incredibly over this past centuries, and because they're gaining all this power, and it's becoming a very decentralized empire, they become tyrants. They rule their subjects, the peasants of the empire, the Christian peasants, or in like Turkish it's like Raya. I don't know how to say it. And they basically become this owning class, similar to the feudalistic structures of Central Europe. And they treated the Raya very badly. They would exercise judicial authority over these people. It was very difficult. Now, this obviously represents a major conflict. If you're the Sultan, if you're the Emperor of the Ottoman Empire, you want to keep the people from rebelling, but you've got this class of Janissary land-owning people that are treating the subjects very badly. This reflects badly on you as the Sultan. You wanna fix these things. This is a major conflict. The Sultan's officers themselves, so the people that were directly appointed by the Sultan, as in not necessarily like a Janissary class of land-owning elites, that kind of thing, were constantly squabbling with each other too, and they were using their detachments of their army, of the Sultan's army, to like protect themselves against each other. And the port, which is the central control in Istanbul, Constantinople, can't do anything. They're struggling to keep things running smoothly, and the Belgrade area is deserted. Out of 1,546 villages in Belgrade, Pashalik, only 592 were inhabited. So only a third, while the rest were either abandoned or burned down during the wars. The Serbs had fled, along with other groups. This is bad. This is like a terrible economic result of all this thing. So they start settling people. They start taking. They realize, okay, well, instead of colonizing these areas, we're not going to colonize this area. That's led to problems in the past. Why don't we just bring other Serbs down from the mountains and settle them in the valleys and that kind of thing, and try and repopulate this area? So they did, and this area starts to become this perfect place for cross-border trade. The Ottomans lift a lot of their restrictions on trade because they realize that, oh, well, if you do something really well on this side of the border, maybe we can sell it at one hell of a a profit on that side of the border if it's something that they really need. So one of the things that becomes, so I think it's like pigs and like other livestock is like really, really valuable to the growing Central European force that is the Habsburg Empire. So they're like exporting pigs, and there's all these like little tracks along the Danube that are like called like, this is the pig road, this is the pig track. And little stone bridges over little fjorded sections of the river that they know, okay, we can like dam this section up temporarily to move all these pigs over the Danube if they need to, or they could send them across in barges, that kind of thing. And that's left a remnant in the Danube part of Serbia to this day. There's all these like weird little tiny things that like don't appear on maps that are like, oh, this is the pig road, that's the pig bridge, blah, 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 blah. And the Serbs sort of grow in population again in the Belgrade Pashalik, and the problem is that the Ottomans they sort of try and they're trying everything. They're turning every dial to try and figure out how are they going to do this. So they start messing with the church. They reverse the autocephaly of the Patriarchate, because they're like, well, too many patriarchs are just fleeing across the border into Austria. We gotta try and figure this out. So they sever the links between the two halves of the church, and they say, that's it, no more independent patriarchate. You're going to come under the control of the Constantinople Patriarchate, who is like sitting right there in Istanbul, in Constantinople, where the Sultan can keep an actual eye on him. He's much more of a puppet. So this is like how to really rein in the Serbs and prevent them from rebelling. And the church is like incredibly in debt by this point, because obviously it's like struggling to raise money. It's all of its parishioners have like fled or been killed in the wars. So the Greek, the Constantinople Patriarchate starts inheriting a lot of that debt and sending Greek priests and bishops out into these churches to try and revive them, but they can't speak a word of Serbian. So the Serbs are just like, well, I go to church and I got to listen to a Greek priest talk. Any money I give him is just going straight to Istanbul. What the hell is going on? This is what had held the Serbs together for up until this point was the church, and that is being stripped away from them. So there's a lot of conflicting things going on here. Not one single thing is happening that'll like either unify or separate the Serbs or pacify them or incite them to rebellion. It's like constantly going this way and the next. War eventually breaks out again between Austria and the Ottomans in 1788, and once again all these haiduks volunteer themselves, and the people in the military frontier decide that they're going to rise up. And this is one of the first times that the Ottomans actually, the Austrians actually formalize the military structure of the Serbs. So the Serbian frontier troops are essentially organized into these things called like Freikorps. So a Freikorps means like free corps, you know, that sort of thing. And the way that they are the way that they're doing war at this stage is to like very much rely heavily on the local troops that happen to be close to that area. So the military frontiers that you can see, the sort of light orange patch that is just north of Belgrade, that is one of the military frontiers, and they organize these people into an expeditionary force to cross the border, and all these haiduks like meet up with them. And when this happens, the first major uprising in this time period happens, and this is called the Kocha Rebellion, the Kocha Frontier, which is named after a guy called Kocha and Jelkovic. He's one of the most famous of these rebel Hajduk Chetnik types. He is, as soon as he hears that the Austrians are invading, he's like, brilliant, we're gonna all get together and we're gonna fight against the Ottomans. And they take a huge amount of territory. You know, they're sending out detachments and are cooperating with the Freikorps and pushing in. Down from the south is the Austrian troops, and they eventually, liberate quite a lot of territory. So this is sort of 60s, and then roughly this time period. So I think this is 1789 or 1788, and what has happened is that these Austrian-backed Haiduks have actually managed to take quite a lot of territory, very similar to the Serbian kingdom that had come before. But the living memory of that is obviously dead. Everyone who fought in that war is probably dead or very old. But the spirit of rebellion is anew. And the problem is, this doesn't go very well. This is the Austrians are very much not going in for a penny and in for a pound. They're not pulling their full weight into this war as much as they could, and they're also not super happy with how much territory Kocha is the Hajduk Kocha is gaining for himself. This is like, oh well, it'll be very clear that this is going to be the person that we're antagonistic towards, because Austrians don't want the Serbs to be free. They want to control them. That's why they set up the Kingdom of Serbia in the first place. That's the legal mechanism under which they think they can control the Serbs, because they want to control Serbia. They want control over it. They want to add it as a piece to their empire. Their empire themselves is filled with Serbs, and they know that if Serbia is liberated, all these Serbs are going to migrate to Serbia, and it's going to become incredibly powerful. And a sizable chunk of these Serbs are militarily trained people. And a lot of them had gotten their military training in Austria, in Hungary, and received the economic backing of the Habsburg realm for generations by this point. So it's well, why would they invest all this time and money and resources into training up these Freikorps and then just, allow them to just inhabit this newly acquired territory? So basically, what we're realizing is that the Austrians might not be the best of friends. They might not be the big buddy, hey, let's help you liberate all of Christendom like we said we would. There's some holes appearing in this plan that had started to manifest when the Habsburg Kingdom of Serbia was abandoned, and now it's looking that same way too. And the rebellion fails. The Austrians and the Ottomans settle a peace, and Kocha is of course captured by the Turks, and he is impaled, because the Ottomans love impaling traitors. That's what they do. They want to make an example of them, so they impale them on a big wooden stake, presumably. I don't quite fancy looking into it, if I'm honest. And he becomes this martyr, basically. He's captured, he's executed, and then people realize, these Turks might not be so great. And the other problem is that things are happening outside of Serbia that are leading to these two to make peace with each other. The Austrians had spent a lot of time taking over Belgrade. They besieged the fortress and they'd taken it over, and they've drained a lot of their resources. But Emperor Joseph II, he dies the following year in 1790, I believe. I could be getting my dates wrong. And the defeat in some areas that the Austrians are feeling, and there's victories in other spots. It's not looking great for the Austrians. They're looking at their accounting books, and they're thinking, okay, so we're on one column we have our debits, on the other side we have our credits, and they're just looking at these things and going, nah, we're spending a bit too much, and I don't think we're getting enough in return. And they decide to make a peace, because of course they need to count their pennies. They need to make sure that they're not funding things that are just going to end up being bad for them in the long run. They don't want this independent Serbian kingdom on their doorstep that they can't control, and they don't really have the time or patience or troops or energy to control it right now, because the previous year, in 1789, the French Revolution broke out. And what originally seemed to be this like sort of uprising, revolt in Paris ends up being this like intercontinental revolution against monarchism. To simplify it in a very, very oversimplified way, it as far as the monarchies of Europe are concerned, the French Revolution is like, they're coming for me. They're coming for me and my kingdom and my emperorship. They're coming for my crown. They want my fancy robes. They want all my gold. That's kind of the way the monarchies are seeing the French Revolution. So it's not really surprising that the Ottomans and the Austrians decide that, okay, we're just going to stop our war right now, and we're going to focus on what the hell is happening in France. Because, of course, not only is France, like, you know, going through this, like, major revolution and chopping its king's head off, they're also, like, the most populous and most powerful and most economically advanced country in Europe at the time. They were the traditional continental European power. You know, they controlled the balance of what happened on the European continent in an extraordinarily disproportionate way for at least the past few centuries. So when something when something crazy is happening over there in France, in Paris, people take note, especially the Austrians, whose own princess, Marie Antoinette, she's one of the victims of this French Revolution. She gets her head cut off as well. She's like the brother of the emperor in Austria, in Vienna. Her dad was the emperor as well. Her mother was Empress Maria Theresa. So she's a Habsburg, and she's connected to this whole thing. And the Austrians are like the traditional rivals of France. Boy oh boy, it's all going haywire. It's all going bananas. As you can see, this all had such drastic consequences. Sultan Selim III is trying to keep the Serbs on side. He's going, okay, well, you know, maybe let's try pacifying the Serbs again and trying to bring them into our sphere. He sort of takes power sort of around the time of the French Revolution. He's coming of age, and he comes to the Sultanate right around the same year. I think it's like 1789. And he decides he's going to try and really rein in the Janissaries. They are forbidden from returning to Belgrade. They confiscate a lot of their privileges, and this basically has the exact thing that you think is going to happen. It makes the Janissaries rebel. They rebel against the Ottoman Sultan himself. So the vizier of Belgrade, the one that is loyal to the Sultan, decides, we've got all these rebel Janissaries on our hands. What are we going to do? Oh, I'll go to the Serbs. I'll get the Serbs to help me. Because, of course, they've got all these, like, well-trained Serbian haiduks running around that they know how to fight. They know how to load the guns. They've got all that kind of thing. So let's check. Let's try and get them on side. So they start trying to give them a little bit of leeway, a little bit of privileges themselves to try and get them on side. So one of the ways they negotiate this, they allow the Serbs to collect their own taxes, or at least collect the taxes and pass them on to the Sultan, because it's that way there's like less of an incentive for corruption. If you're just like a Turkish official and you're taxing the people, there's a lot of incentive to just like skim some money off of the top of that before you send it the Sultan's way. Whereas the Serbs, as far as they can tell, are much less likely to have that same level of corruption in that way, which I think is kind of silly, but you get it. Like they're trying to do everything they can to get the Serbs on side. So in addition to this, they allow the Serbs to start putting some money into restoring their cities and towns, especially their churches and their monasteries. And then they give them guns, and they say, cool, let's go fight against the Janissaries. And the Serbs this like little piece of like help that they give to the Serbs, as well as all these Serbs that had brought down from the mountains, who would become like livestock traders and that kind of thing. They started to grow really wealthy, and when they're growing a little bit more wealthy, their situation is a bit more improved. They're not just like peasants toiling the field in large numbers like they were before. Now they have like incredibly wealthy livestock traders. They're getting really wealthy trading in pigs, trading in bacon, trading in ham, salami. It's all with a little bit of that new flavor that had come in from India, paprika. It's all making delicious, lovely salami. They're getting really wealthy, right? And the problem is, like, just like we were talking about before with the Janissaries, once you have this like really wealthy, well-armed class of people that is rising up against the Janissaries and is ostensibly fighting for the Sultan, what is actually happening is that you're decreasing the Sultan's power. It is becoming more devolved over time, not less devolved. There is an incredible stratification of wealth and power in terms of the military power. This is sounding awfully familiar to what's going on in France at the time. There's an incredibly rapid stratification of society in a way that had not happened before. So if you ignore sort of like the philosophies and the politics of what happened in the French Revolution, if you just look at the like actual sociological result, is you have an incredible raising of the position of a once incredibly downtrodden and exploited class of people, and a leveling out on the top of the nobility and the bourgeois people. They're sort of like reduced a lot in their in their status in society, but not really. Basically what I'm saying is there's a leveling out, there's a stratification of this kind of thing. And one of the main differences is that the church in Serbia is kind of like gaining a lot of its position back, whereas the church in France, the Catholic Church, is like decreasing in strength. It is having all of its property confiscated by the French revolutionaries. So there's this leveling out and evening out in different ways. This is incredibly important to the Serbs because, of course, the church is what holds them together, and they suffer whenever the church suffers. So every time that there's a policy that is directed against the church, the Serbs suffer. Whenever there's a policy that helps the church, the Serbs prosper, and it sort of starts to be this like correlation of prosperity that the Serbs start to observe. But the Napoleonic Wars are breaking out. The French revolutionaries have like put all their eggs into the Napoleon basket. He's crowned himself emperor. He goes on a rampage, first defending the liberties and ideals of the French Revolution, and then at one point starts to try and spread that, And there's a lot of motivations for why you would want to do that. In the same way that you want to control your neighbors and control the buffer zone around you, there's also like a genuine idea of trying to spread the ideas of the French Revolution, spreading things like the abolition of hereditary fiefdoms, the abolition of serfdom, the abolition of church property, which happens in different ways in different areas. But the institution of la nation, like that's the thing that becomes this like defining characteristic of the French Revolution. La nation is like the people, the nation. Before that, you didn't really, you were a subject, you were a serf, you were a piece, a pawn to be moved around, but now you're a nation, you are a unified people. And they're wrestling with that idea, and it's not being executed in the same place everywhere. But as the French troops march around the European continent, they're spreading these ideas, and these ideas make their way into all corners of the European continent, where people are starting to recognize themselves as a nation. The Serbs, like, they know they're a Serb, but they don't know that the Serbs are a nation. That is a concept that crystallizes with time. So one of my theories, one of my like hypotheses is that the Serbs have probably the oldest nationalism in the Balkans. And the reason why I say that is because it is so deeply tied into this like mythic church and mythic sacred dynasty and these rebellions, these like migrations beforehand, and poetry and art and that kind of thing. It is so intertwined long before the French Revolution happens, long before the La Nation, the concept happens, that if it were to happen afterwards, if all those building blocks were to happen afterwards, you would call it nationalism. But it's just the concept hadn't been around yet. And I think if you had to look at the two most prominent like Balkan peoples to have the oldest concepts of the nation, of La Nation, it would probably be, for me, I would say the Serbs and the Bulgarians. They're probably equal in that way. There is an argument to be made for the Greeks as well, the Hellenes. The problem is that the Greek nationalism tends to get this like very broad sort of split down the middle on what it means to be Greek. Is it this like nation that has sort of survived intergenerationally from the time of the classical era, or is it that they're Romans and they're like the real Romans and that they should try and restore the Roman Empire? It's this like weird obsession that happens with the Greeks and their like vestige of the Roman this vestigial part of the Roman Empire. So that's the only reason why I would say that nationalism, in the way that we understand it, the oldest part of it is probably Serbia, probably Bulgaria. That's just an opinion that I have. There's nothing that I could conclusively back up. But these ideas are very much being tapped into when the French Revolution happens, and as the French are marching around, following old Napoleon in his funny hat and his cannons, all that good stuff. So in comes the Janissaries. By this point, they are being termed Dahiyas. I can't speak Turkish, and the Dahiyas are this like tyrannical class of Janissary leaders that are just rebelling against the Sultan, and they're executing Serbs wherever they can, and they start doing all sorts of horrible things. They're doing arbitrary tax raises. They would rock up. Mr. Tax Collector would say, I'm here to pick up my 10 gold coins, and then the Serb would give out his gold coins, and they would say, I said I'm here to pick up my 20 gold coins, and then the Serb would go get his 10 more gold coins, and then the Turk would be like, I said I'm here to pick up my 30 gold coins, just stuff like that. Arbitrary raises in taxes and really oppressive. And these like wealthier Serbs that had started getting really wealthy through trading livestock, they're not keen on this. This isn't great. And it's not any better for the peasants either, the lower class of society, because they're getting pushed right back into serfdom. They're being forced to work for the Dahiya. They're essentially being taken as slaves. This is suddenly the Serbs have like a new enemy to direct themselves against. They're being told by the Sultan that they need to fight against the Janissaries, and the Janissaries are treating them like absolute shit. So you can tell the picture starts to become really clear about, okay, who's our enemy? The Serbs are incredibly affected by this. They're really trying to restore the Sultan's power. In 1802 they tried to restore the old order of things, the Sipahis, which was this like other military warlike privileged class that had existed, and it sort of their power had been eroded by the Janissaries. They want to bring that back, and they fail. Then the Turks respond. The Dahiya respond with this horrible event, this horrible thing. They call it the felling of the Knezes. So they round up every Hajduk leader and every anybody who had the prominent leaders of Serbian military factions or civilian factions. Anybody, rebels, riffraff, they gather about 70 of their leaders and they summarily execute them. And they call them the knezes because like knez in Serbian and a lot of languages, it means like prince. And this is like incredibly insulting. They're saying, look at your princes, look at what we do to them. We kill them because they're rebelling and they're rebelling against us. This sets off another uprising. Lo and behold, you can't just kill a bunch of people willy-nilly and expect nothing to happen. I always find this like thing in despotic regimes and these like dictatorships or like military regimes where they just like start killing people that they see, the leaders of people that they see as a threat to them, and it just never works, does it? Or is it one of those like self-selecting things where we hear about the ones where it didn't work because it outraged people so much, but I don't know, it just never seems to work. They seem to sort of stoke yet another uprising by this action. People are like horrified. They're like, oh my goodness, we need to get rid of these Dehaya. Why can I never pronounce that word? Dehaya. They're really, this is like all or nothing. We need to get rid of them. So in comes this guy. His name is George Petrovich, which just means like George the Black Petro. I think it means like black. So it's like he becomes known as Black George, and short nickname for Black George is Kara George. So he is this Hajduk leader. He was once a Freikorps fighter, and he became a rebel, a riffraff, and he leads this general massive uprising against the Janissaries. The problem with this rebellion, it doesn't last that long. It lasts about 10 years, less than a decade, about 9 years. And it was broken up into phases that essentially results in its failure. However, what they managed to accomplish in those 10 years, in those 9 years, were the pieces I was opening this video with. The bits that actually have a lasting impact is the institutions that they create. The French Revolution spreads the idea of having these anthropomorphized institutional things that would outlast somebody's actual office. So if you have some person that's in charge of one thing, that obviously you can only really like do that thing very well until you die, you pass on. But an institution that has staying power, because an institution can be like constitutionally bounded. You know, we talk about the things like an institution of something like the police. You know, the individual police officers may die, but the institution of the police remains. And this is something that the French Revolution tries to really spread. They try to spread the idea of like forming these constitutions. And this is something that is embraced by the Serbs, especially the rebels led by Karađorđe. They're going to use their time during their rebellion to set up institutions. And this is helpful because the Serbs aren't rebelling against the Sultan. They're technically with the Sultan because the Sultan's enemies are the Janissaries. They're just rebelling against the Janissaries. So on paper, Karađorđe gets to say, no, we're not rising up against the Turks. We're just helping restore the Sultan's authority. We're getting rid of the Janissaries. We're restoring a system of self-government that the Sultan had given to us earlier that the Janissaries took away. This is all very political, as you can see. This is something that, like, okay, on paper we're on the side of the Sultan, but in reality we're gonna be very much inspired by the ideas of the French Revolution, and we're gonna set something up that helps us achieve a little bit more independence. So in this liberated territory, they start like really trying to diplomatically reach out. They reach out to the Russians. They reach out to the Austrians, and they try to negotiate with the Turks to like set up for themselves an autonomous piece of the empire. The Turks are like, hell no, we're not gonna negotiate with the Russians and the Turks. Like, those are our enemies. We're not gonna agree to any deal that you bring to us that includes the Austrians and the Russians, because how do we know that you didn't do a little sneaky agreement behind our back? So they keep rejecting. This gives Karageorge more time to set up these institutions. They managed to expel the Dahirs, the Janissaries, that kind of thing, and they are really making strides and efforts towards getting themselves recognized. The Serbs are still not managing to get anything that they want on paper, though. So they decide that one of these institutions that they're going to do is try and sort of like set up a kind of parliament. And parliament is like sort of the wrong word for it. What the French revolutionaries had called the National Assembly was basically get people in a big room, everybody important in a big room, to make decisions together. So in a suburb of Belgrade, in a place called Pachani, an assembly meets, and this is like the foundation of the Serbian National Assembly. This is where like the Serbian National Assembly traces its roots to this to this calling of the assembly by Karageorge, which is also kind of not really the case, because Serbian institutions had already been tracing their roots to the privileges that they were granted in Karlovci, in the Habsburg Empire. But all of these sort of things eventually get like whitewashed and written cleanly into the Serbian national myth to sort of say that there's this unbroken continuity, that kind of thing. The idea of like putting everybody together and making collective choices by all the people that actually have some level of authority is basically lends the whole movement a lot more legitimacy than it would be if it was just a military rebellion. Having a military rebellion is fine short term, but it's very easy for the Sultan to say, hey, no, I'm just going to put down this rebellion and restore my authority. It's a lot harder to do that if you're going up against a national assembly. It's a lot harder to push against this tide of liberal reform, because obviously liberal reform is something that is gaining popularity all over the continent. It is not something that is unique to Serbia or France or any of these other Napoleonic kingdoms that are set up. This at about the same time, Karageorge starts reaching out to the other independent Turkish kingdom, this principality in light blue, which is Montenegro. They sort of developed mostly independently during their time, like trying to resist the Turks as much as they could, gaining a little bit of autonomy. We'll come back to them later. Karageorge is setting up all these institutions. So he sets up a courts led by Serbian judges. He sets up administrative councils. He sets up negotiating bodies. He sets up diplomatic bodies. He sets up places who arbitrate and will assign agreements, and bodies representatives from all the different bodies will meet in a separate body, and that will be like the body of representatives that can help make rubber stamp things. The institutions, it's all this like bureaucratic nightmare, and I think we're very used to that in our modern world. We're used to like looking at institutions as this like insanely bureaucratic nightmare that like slows things down. But at the time, it was like very very revolutionary, because it sort of lends itself as this like democratic expression, even if it's just sort of only on paper as a democratic expression. It does have a revolutionary effect on how the Serbs negotiate their freedoms. They eventually reach an agreement with the Turks, and they're gonna basically iron out a deal where the Serbs will achieve a modicum of autonomy, like a little bit of things will be added onto the privileges that they received a decade or two earlier. They come back with this deal, and everything's going great. And the Karađorđe, one of the stipulations is that they're going to slowly reduce the amount of Turks that are in this new Serbian autonomous principality. And this is like one of the sticking points for the Turks, but they agree. Well, if we're going to give you self-governing status, you should be able to make the choices of which people can be expelled, right? That's a power that you should have. We can all agree on. We just don't like the idea of you just kicking out all the Turks and Muslims. So they say, okay, well, in our agreement, we're just gonna kick out the bad ones. You know, the ones that we can prove have committed crimes, and we're gonna have independent judiciaries that they'd set up. Cool. This is an agreement that is reached. However, the agreement does not go through because Russia decides, oh, they've been reached out to by the Serbs. Come and help us out, please. If you're on our side, we can get everything we want in the negotiation. So the Russians are like mulling it over, taking their sweet time, figuring out if they want to defend the Serbs or not, because there's this like intercontinental problem going on with the rise of Napoleon, and they're super worried about getting involved in another war. So they're like, no, we're not. We're a bit worried about we're a bit worried about Napoleon, but they eventually end up making a tentative peace with Napoleon that makes them a little bit more free to go to war with the Ottomans. Boom! Russia's at war. Russia's coming in, and they're coming down on the sides of the Serbs. So the Serbs go, hell yeah, and they break off negotiations. And there is a military alliance signed between the Serbs and the Russians, and they start fighting the Ottomans together. Then things break down between the Russians and the French. The Russians get this, like, they hastily form a treaty in which they will be the Serbs' protector, but it has an expiration date in 1809, and that time between the signing of this treaty in 1807 to 1809, this is a time that is used to strengthen the state. Karađorđe really strengthens all these institutions that we managed before. They rebuild things. They pour a lot of money into land. All of this money is coming from Russia to like really help build this land. They organize a Soviet, a representative body that becomes this like judicial body. It has it gets reorganized and turned into this like high judicial authority in which to prosecute high crimes of the state, that kind of thing. These kinds of institutions are like what states are built around. They're really strengthening their institutions and becoming a nation state in the way that we understand them today. But the Russians are a little bit preoccupied with Napoleon, and they eventually, sheepishly, have to abandon this because they get invaded by Napoleon. And also Napoleon is like is making a sort of tentative alliance. That France is the traditional ally of the Ottomans for a long time, so they've got the Ottomans on side, and the Ottomans are really happy that Napoleon is invading Russia, and this basically breaks the whole deal down, and things are not going well. By 1809, the Russian and Turkish hostility reignites, and Karađorđe is doing his best to like keep things held together. He's trying to reach out to the Montenegrins, and they're like fighting alongside the Montenegrins. but then they're suffering defeats. So one of the major defeats that happens as the Russians are um, as the Russians are getting involved, they're defeated. The Serbs suffer this major defeat. One of their Hajduk leaders is like Stevan Sindjelic. I think I'm pronouncing that. He is he retreats to like a fortified position. He goes. He repeats. It's a fortified position near Niche, on a place called Chegar Hill, and he's surrounded by the Turks, and the Turks are coming in and about to take over. This has become a full-on rebellion at this point, not just against those Janissaries, those like rebel Janissary leaders. This has become a full-blown rebellion against the Sultan, and he knows that if he's captured, he's going to be impaled along with any of his troops. So he tells what troops he can to flee, to run away, and he blows up the fortification, the barracks, the trenches filled with this like gunpowder, barrels of gunpowder. He shoots that, blows it up, and then all of his remaining troops that had been left to defend the fort, as well as all the Turks that like breach through, thousands of them. They're killed in this massive explosion, and he becomes yet another Hajduk martyr. The Turks, the local Pashalik, the local setup after the restoration of the Sultan's power, the local representative of the Sultan decides he's going to take every skull of every rebel leader. And he's going to put them into a stone tower monument. He's going to take all these rebel leaders and put all their bones and skulls into this large tower as like a warning to future rebellion. In essence, you could say a lot worse than being impaled. Obviously, impalation would be terrible, but this is like a standing monument and testament. Don't rebel against us. We will defeat you. You are not safe. Incredibly disturbing psychological warfare that happens, and you could see why this like foment of rebellion just does not go out. The rebels are exhausted, and they're eventually fragmenting. Karageorge is like very disturbed by this defeat. Opposition to Karageorge starts to increase. It's very easy to have this like one political leader if you're winning everything, but as soon as you start losing, suddenly opposition to the leader increases. Karageorge tries to get help from Austria. He even tries to get help from Napoleon. He's like, hey, we're trying to set up a independent republic or whatever. And this is just not going well for them. They're struggling. They're looking weaker day by day. By 1913, another rebel leader, Hajduk Veliko, he dies. He suffers a major defeat. That was the image we saw earlier. This is a representation of the Skull Tower. This is a drawing representing what it looks like. So bits of it are still around today. I think you can still go see it in Serbia. And this is Hajduk Veliko. He is also defeated. He is defending another one of these like dugout fortresses, and he's hit by a cannonball. He dies immediately. But in the apocryphal story about him and the songs about him, he's sort of hit with his last breath, saying death to the Turks, or he mutters something. I can't remember. There's like conflicting stories, but he becomes this martyr, this leader, for which revenge must be had. Defeats are piling up, and the Serbian population realize that they need to make peace with the Ottomans, and the first stage of the uprising dies. Everybody who can flees if they can. Those who are caught, a lot of them are impaled. Karageorge manages to escape. He first I think he goes to like Vienna, and then he goes to Russia. And Russia like refuses to extradite him to the Ottomans and says, "Hell no, we're not giving up this potential military leader in the future. We're going to keep him right here where we can keep an eye on him." The Austrians, you know, they're also have some skin in the game. They're not happy with this whole thing, but again, all these major powers, they're kind of really focused on Napoleon. They're kind of focusing on what's going on with Napoleon, and he eventually is obviously defeated. We won't go into that details right now, but Napoleon is eventually defeated by the combined coalitions of Europe, and he stops being this uniting force between all these people that he had been before. Yet another rebellion happened. So this is we're sort of done with the first Serbian uprising and Kocha's rebellion, but yet another uprising happens in 1814 by a rebel, a Hajduk named Hadji Prodan. He is horrified by the things he's seeing and all the people that are being impaled, and he decides to lead his own rebellion. But the vast majority of the rebels don't join him because they're starting to. There's another rebel leader who'd sort of taken a back seat to the first Serbian uprising and the first two conflicts. His name is Miloš Obranović. He'd been holding off. He decides he's not going to join Hadji Prodan's rebellion. He doesn't think the time is right. He wants to set up more allies abroad using these institutions that were set up by Karađorđe. Karađorđe has fled, and he sees a power vacuum happening. So he's deciding, okay, well, we're just going to hold off for a little while. We're going to figure out if we can find some allies abroad. The Congress of Vienna gets together to discuss what they're going to do for Napoleon's defeat. And they're kind of no longer the general tide, the general mood in the room is kind of anti-rebellion, right? Because they've seen the defeated French by this stage are seen as like rebels, and there's all these other like local rebellions that have happened all over Europe within the bits of the territories that the monarchies had controlled. So they're kind of, their appetite for rebellion is ending. They also don't want the Turks to fall right now because both the Austrians and the Russians are like really worried about each other, and they're both worried that if Turkey, if the Ottoman Empire that is Turkey falls too quickly, then you know that chaos could ensue trying to take over the Balkans for either one of them, and they're both worried about the other. And neither one of them is happy about their current military position to be able to take advantage of a fall of the Ottoman Empire. And they don't want all these like independent principalities and kingdoms to start emerging in the Balkans, very ironically, because that's exactly what ends up happening like 100 years later. And they want to sort of have a managed decline, a managed emergency decline of the Ottomans is much more manageable than a quick collapse of the Ottoman Empire. So they decide that they're not going to recognize an independent Serbia. So Obranović in 1815 decides the time is right. He's going to rise up against the Ottomans. He gets everybody together. Anybody that was loyal to Karađorđe, as well as all these other like rival factions, those who can, he decides he's going to institute a brand new rebellion. So this is the state that has been, sort of resolved in the aftermath of Karađorđe's rebellion, and then by 1815, a new rebellion is set up by Obranović. The Obranović is much more of a schmoozer. He's much better at the political side of things, I think it's safe to say. He is entering into negotiations with commanders of the Ottoman armies directly, and he's got a little bit of charisma. He's entering into these he has all these verbal agreements with these military commanders, and this forestalls what all the rebels see as inevitable. as like a crushing of the rebellion. He tries to forestall that inevitable to try and negotiate a little bit, and he's saying, well, I'm a lot more reasonable than Karageorge. I'm a lot more reasonable. I'm a reasonable man, and you can negotiate with me in good faith. And these verbal agreements sort of forestall the action, and this weird recognition of their informal autonomy and all these like institutions that Obrenović resurrects and uses to govern the piece of territory that he's taken over give the whole thing this like informal autonomy that actually makes them function as a state under Miloš Obrenović, who starts to call himself Knez, and he starts to collect taxes and make a lot of a functioning state monetarily. And this is a lot better timed in the peace negotiations. He's holding all the cards when the peace negotiations happen in the Congress of Europe. The great getting together of people after Napoleon's second defeat, because of course the dude had to be defeated twice, and they all have to get together and decide what's the European boundaries going to look like. Miloš, as a mover and a shaker and a schmoozer, he's doing much better. He's holding all the cards and power at that time, and he decides that he's going to negotiate for autonomy, and he's going to be the prince. He's going to be the recognized prince in the former part of the Smederevo Pashalik or Sanjak or whatever it happens to be. And this is something that is unpacked a lot in the years that have happened since, because it's like this negotiation goes like incredibly well for Obrenović. It's like almost too well, and you realize that there's this whole chain of events that are happening outside of Serbia that happens to go in their favor. This like it's like the tide is turned, and you're no longer just supporting a rebel. If the informal agreements, those like verbal agreements, are actually standing, and you can make a case that they're actual formal agreements, then it's suddenly you're not as a European power, you're not like supporting a rebel. You're supporting somebody that has been recognized by the Turks themselves. So it gets everybody in a much more negotiatory mood. And then everybody sort of starts to become convinced that an independent Serbia in the middle is actually a good idea. It's not a bad idea. It's good because it's helping manage that decline of the Ottoman Empire. The Austrians are much more in favor of it now because they don't have to worry about Napoleon, and they're saying, okay, well, we can keep our thumb on this little Serbian kingdom, and it can be this sort of weird buffer state between us and the Ottoman Empire. Same thing for the Russians. They all have their various interests in the area, and they all try to compete for that interest in that area. And that's essentially what they become. They become this like weird in-between piece of the of these liberating movements of the Serbian Principality. And that is essentially where we'll end off our discussion today on this topic. And I think next week it might be good to start unpacking Montenegro a little bit, because poor little Montenegro down at the bottom there, he's just they just keep getting ignored. All the big brother Serbs and Bosnians and Croats, they always seem to be doing they're getting more of their limelight in the historiography and the history books. I think it's time for poor little Montenegro. Let's find out what's going on there next time. So that's it for the main topic of this video. So we're going to go into question time. So I've got a few questions. Not all of them are super related to what we're talking about today. One patron just said, love the work, thank you. That's not a question, but I just wanted to stroke my ego a little bit. And then a YouTube member over on the main channel, Husky Cool Stop Motions, had a few questions. What videos will you do in the future? I don't know. I'm kind of juggling right now. So I'm doing Serbia, obviously, as you can probably tell. I'm juggling Serbia at the moment. Once that's done, I'm thinking about maybe taking a look at the Netherlands again, because I don't like the way that that video ended up being. It sort of had to skip over everything. It was back when I was trying to do shorter videos because I thought that that's what the algorithm wanted. So I'm thinking of redoing that. But I think I'm also getting a little bit more of an appetite for redoing Spain. That's like a really bad old video that I did that I'd like to remake. I'm just sort of trying to search for the right sources and the right narrative to find it by. But yeah, I don't know. I don't. I also I'm interested in like really tackling England and Britain again. Revisiting those topics. A lot of them are just like I drowned myself in those topics and then wasn't able to really formulate coherent thoughts about them anymore, which was difficult. His other question was maybe some more about yourself. My name is James, and I'm a YouTuber. Third question, how did the Russians conquer Siberia? Okay, so I guess this is in reference to the Russian video. The Russian conquest of Siberia, as far as I understand it, is it wasn't like a one size fits all. They sort of conquered it very much in 3 or 4 separate different like methods or ways. I can't remember them all. So, but off the top of my head, without looking into my sources and stuff, from what I remember, it's like militarily, obviously, there's this like great expedition that is sort of led by the Cossacks, Ukrainian and like the new Don Cossacks and that kind of thing. They become these like incredibly highly mobile frontier troops that are like pushed deeply into Siberia, and they're essentially dominating all of the isolated peoples that they encounter. And one of the ways that they build up wealth is they start extracting wealth at the point of a sword, at the end of a gun barrel. A tribute system, and that tribute system goes into the coffers of the Muscovite leadership. And it also helps enrich those people that explore out there. So obviously it's very barren and isolated parts of Siberia. And there's if you can extract a lot of that wealth, you can sort of make yourself a nice little bit of money out there. I think that attracts a lot of people. I think, and then there's a lot of economic ways that they expand there as well. One of the ways is like the Stroganov family. So like the Stroganov is this like Muscovite. Maybe I don't actually remember where they were from, but they're a noble family that had controlled incredible amounts of wealth, and they're just basically getting granted these like little monopolies on trade and resource extraction wherever the conquests go in Siberia, and they control like an incredible amount of wealth in Siberia from memory, concentrated in this like very enterprise-led monopolistic style economic colonization, which wasn't altogether unheard of at the time. Obviously, the economic colonization was the way that European monarchies were happening were doing a lot in the age of discovery. And then another way I think that they did was these trading ports in the Arctic Sea. So like navigation and ice-breaking ships and technology sort of advances a lot, and they sort of start hopping along the coast of the Arctic Circle around Russia. I think that's like another way that they colonize it. And yeah, they sort of started setting up these like big mining districts and like logging districts and beaver fur and fur trapping and that sort of thing. And it's a very economic extraction based conquest and colonization into Siberia. And I think that's one of those economic expressions is it's very much like if you can control the source of wealth, you can control the people. Military conquest really, it only gets you so far unless you can control the sources of wealth, and that wealth that the people can use to resist you or rise up against you, that kind of thing. So I think the deck was stacked in the Russians' favor a lot. They managed to use their military assets very wisely, especially in the form of the Cossacks, who were very good at like traveling far, long distances on horseback and were used to wild, rugged terrains and fighting other nomadic peoples, that kind of thing. They were also this is the other often forgotten thing about the Cossacks. It was like they were actually very river they were very river friendly. I don't know. I've been streaming too damn long. They were very good at like navigating rivers. It's like this weird piece. Like we think of the Cossacks as like this horse-based mobile force, but they were very good at like just rowing down rivers and navigating themselves down rivers. All the maps of Siberia were done by these expeditions, and they're primarily using the rivers as their bases to sort of row barges up and down these rivers and extract tribute from the local indigenous peoples of Siberia and that kind of thing. So yeah, there was a bunch of different ways, but yeah, I can't go into more detail than that. And fourth question, what happened to the Danube Delta all these years? Its history. And then I asked you for clarification on that question. Husky is cool, stop motions. You said you wanted to know the history of the Danube Delta just generally. I don't know. Sorry. Anyway, so that's it for the questions today. I'll just do a quick check that I didn't get any more questions in my inbox. Doesn't look like it. Okay, thank you all for watching. Remember to support on Patreon or on YouTube memberships on the main channel. If you want to do any of those, you can do so by looking at the description below this video. Or you can simply leave a like or a comment and subscribe for more. I'll see you next time. We're going to do the Montenegrins. If we can absolutely help it, we will be on time and we won't be cut off by the stream at the end like that keeps seeming to happen for absolutely no reason. I'm just like talking and in the middle of a sentence it just sort of